As the Miami Dolphins creep towards the end of the 2024 season with a chance to get back to 500 against Cleveland in Week 17, there's a big picture question that's lingering for this football team, and that's, what are you going to do about Tyreek Hill?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. Want to give a welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. If you're not an everydayer, you picked a good one. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase to win $50 instantly when you play $5. We are looking at Tyreek Hill and his situation and weighing out what options the Dolphins are going to have this offseason as it pertains to retaining Tyreek Hill's services, potentially not retaining Tyreek Hill's services. This has been a trying season for Tyreek Hill. And Tyreek, in the time that he's spent with the Dolphins since the beginning of the 2022 season, has been hyper productive as a player, right? He's got currently 4,343 receiving yards and 308 receptions in what equates to 48 games. So that's the traditional 16-game seasons. He played 17 games, 16 games. He got 2 games left to play this year. He's played 15 games thus far. Production on the field has been a moving target. The yardage and the receptions and the targets was high each of the first 2 years, but 7 touchdowns the first year, nearly double that, 13 the second year. And then this year, we're averaging about half as many yards per game as what we did the previous 2 seasons, 112 yards per game in 2013, and he had 55 thus far through 15 games this season. He's still been targeted 111 times. But Tyreek playing through a wrist injury, Tyreek dealing with not being the focal point of the offense to the umpteenth degree, the way in which he was. And look, they've kind of alluded to the 2K chase was a real thing. It was a real thing that happened. And that obviously didn't happen, but Tyreek did lead the league in receiving yards last season with 1,799. It's great. But obviously Tyreek has started to receive some more criticism and critique around his play because there's been frustrating moments all too often, like the ones we saw against the 49ers, where there's an early money route that the Dolphins have run a million times. And Tyreek himself said he didn't get his head around fast enough because if he did, he probably beats the safety who's drifting over the top, and he's going to have a house call from like 70 yards out. And at least would have been a first down in a 15-plus yard game. Then you have Tua throwing perhaps his best ball of the season in the face of pressure with Malik Collins and Nick Bosa on top of him, where he's lined up to throw out the middle, and he throws with touch from 26 yards out, a ball to the back corner of the end zone that was tipped. Was it still a catchable ball despite being tipped? Yes. But it was a play that, it's the kind of play you would like a $30 million a year player to make. Now, when I did the grading of the game, I didn't kill Tyreek for not catching that ball because, again, it was tipped. It would have been a tough catch. But then you have a fade later in the game that would have been another touchdown that hit him right between the numbers, right between the elbows, and fell incomplete. Very similar ball placement and defender position, just on the other side of the field, so looking inwards from his left as compared to looking inwards from his right, to the touchdown he caught against the Chargers in week 1. Now, they were much further out. It wasn't at like the 3-yard line like it was against the Chargers, but he's made that catch before. He's plenty capable of making that catch. And I know people have pulled up the reels of all the big games and the Tyreek mistakes against Philadelphia last year and Baltimore last year with the drop touchdown, um, the drop touch or the fumble against the Chiefs that is a return for a touchdown that's the deciding score going the other way in 2023. And there's some valid criticism there as far as, for the player that Tyreek Hill statistically is and the player that you're paying him to be, the player he's been in some of the biggest moments has not been equal. And it's been a trying season for Tyreek. There's been off the field incidences going all the way back to week 1, getting momentarily apprehended outside the stadium. There's been issues off the field in the offseason, in each of the last 2 seasons. There's been this wrist injury that he's been playing through. And Tyreek himself said at the post game, that his teammates know everything he's been going through this season. Sounds like he's playing through an injury, and I respect continuing to play. But then for an admission to be made in the way in which Tyreek Hill made an admission at the podium after the game and the performance that he had against the 49ers, it's kind of eye-opening. And this is a player who is in his age 30 season. He's going to turn 31 years old in March. And the Dolphins adjusted his contract. And I use the phrase adjusted very particularly because there's a lot of perceptions around the adjustment that Tyreek Hill's contract got. Remember, they didn't add any new years to the back end of the deal. They moved some cash from the end of the contract in the dummy year on the back end up to this year. So he got a cash raise this year, and they guaranteed him next year's salary. This was not a extension with a bunch of new years, which is what they did with Xavier Howard, which really raked him over the coals. Now, does it complicate the matters of if you decided you wanted to move on from Tyreek Hill after the season? Yeah, it does. There's some strategic decisions you're going to have to make. And we're going to get into all of those by the end of the show as far as options that the Dolphins have moving forward with Tyreek Hill after this season. But I committed to a couple weeks ago, Tuesdays are going to be on the show more big picture conversations around elements of the team. And when Tyreek Hill says, I'm not practicing enough to make the plays that I need to make, and then Tua's asked about it, he says, yeah, there's no secret. If that's what he said he needs, then we need more reps. And he's been listed as a limited or non-participant for personal reasons on the injury report. He's been listed as a vet rest player on the injury report. There's a lot that goes into that, and want to touch on that here in this episode of Locked On Dolphins as well, before we ultimately get to what kind of options the Dolphins realistically have. It's going to come your way next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. NFL playoffs are almost here. It's not too late to get in on the regular season action over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a dub. I love betting on the game totals, the over-under for points scored in the game. For this Dolphins-Browns game, they are not expecting a lot of points. They are also expecting a Dolphins win. The line has moved in favor of the Dolphins up to 6.5. So not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel has bets for players who are going to score touchdowns, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. It's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So obviously Tyreek Hill did not play his best game of the season, and that's putting it mildly, against the San Francisco 49ers. He finished with 3 catches for 29 yards and 1 touchdown on 7 targets, a week after catching 2 of his 7 targets for 36 yards and definitively running one wrong route on an interception and then failing to win a 50-50 ball with the game on the line against Derek Stingley Jr. Now, there's blame to be shared because I know everything just becomes an absolutism. You said this about Tyreek. That means you're absolving Tua Tagovailoa of blame on these plays as well. Not doing that. And I ain't playing that game, right? Tyreek can run a wrong route as distinguished and called out by his quarterback and his head coach after the game. And that can be his fault. Tua can make a bad decision to throw the deep out to Derek Stingley in the red zone on the second interception. And Tua could have thrown a better ball in the same way that Tyreek could have won the ball at the catch point on the third interception. All of those things can simultaneously be true. Okay, so nobody take what I said here. But he's been targeted 14 times, caught 5 balls for 65 yards the last 2 weeks. And I think what's the most troubling is for Tyreek to come up on the podium and say the lack of Wednesday practice reps, the lack of reps with Tua and the vet rest days are starting to add up. Man, we're out here running wrong routes. We're out here dropping touchdown passes. We're not getting our head around with the timing on time, regardless of how long you have or have not been in the system. That's a tough look. And you know, whether that assignment of responsibility goes to Mike McDaniel and the training staff for how they do load management and protect players from too much wear and tear throughout the season, whatever it is. Again, multiple things can be true, so don't take me saying that and saying I'm absolving Tyreek Hill for his share of the blame of the last 2 weeks of 5 catches on 14 targets after he caught 10 for 115 and a touchdown on 14 targets against Jets. Don't do that, please. But I think back to training camp. There'd be times where Tyreek's coming out for training camp at a different window than everybody else. Everybody says, is Tyreek practicing today? And then sure enough, he comes out on his own accord later into practice. And then he'll do the one-on-ones, and then he's not partaking in, and you could justify it as load management. And whoever's decision it is, I can't say I'm particularly surprised that at some point this adds up and here you are. I think the good news for Tyreek Hill from a production standpoint is you've scored 5 touchdowns the last 7 weeks. That's good. But we're sitting on the fringe, 834. We might not get 1,000 yards this year, despite the fact that we're going to finish with probably 125 targets minimum. Now, that would be the lowest amount of targets he's had in a season since 2019 when he only played in 12 games. And before that, you got to go back to 2017 to have the last time he didn't have more than 130 targets in a season. So the target workload is definitely down. But for the benefit of the team, I think you have to be prepared to make the most of what opportunities you get so that the passing offense can be balanced in the way that we've seen the Dolphins passing offense be balanced this year, with Jonnu Smith setting a franchise record for receptions by a tight end in a single season. By having Devon Achane as a complementary underneath player with speed, as compared to Jonnu being the power player. Both of those guys have 76 receptions apiece. Jalen Waddle, obviously, in his role when he's healthy, he's down to 74 targets. Jalen Waddle's has a 10% higher success rate on targets this year than Tyreek Hill. And I know his numbers against man coverage, for all of the man coverage that the Dolphins are catching this year, his success rate against man coverage is significantly down. I mean, tight ends and running backs underneath, those are traditionally much more high percentage targets. Devon Achane's catching 89% of his targets, and he's running in-breakers 20 yards downfield. Jonnu Smith's catching 80% of his targets this year, averaging 8.4 yards per target. Meanwhile, Tyreek Hill has a catch percentage on targets that's 10% lower than Jalen Waddle, despite the fact that he leads the league in targets by 26 targets over Jonnu Smith. So yeah, you're not going to get 170 targets again. But if you're not going to be ready for the opportunities that you do get because you're not practicing enough, so is the incentive like there still has to be incentive to be ready for your touches and targets. And I will give Tyreek Hill credit for this because I know the popular thing to do is just throw a bunch of dirt on a guy in all phases all the time. Tyreek's made some key blocks. And after the criticism against the Packers for Tyreek not being in on your 13 personnel, the following week against the Jets, guess who was in on 13? Tyreek Hill. Guess who was in on 13 this week because Jalen Waddle didn't play? Tyreek Hill on 13. And he's made some big blocks, which I respect because this is a no block, no rock offense. And it has not been a strength for him. And to see him in some critical moments on front side, getting attached on defensive backs, getting down in the red zone and wiping a linebacker down. He's sealing on a defensive end against San Francisco for an explosive run. Like there's effort in different ways, and I respect how those efforts are showing up on the tape. But Tyreek and the chase for 2K and that being off this year and simply divvying the targets more evenly between himself. I mean, Waddle, before he got hurt, was on pace for about the same amount of targets as what he was going to have anyway. So divvying a portion of 40% of Tyreek Hill's targets or 30% of Tyreek Hill's targets between Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane versus what the workload was for the tight end position and the running back position in the passing game last year. Like it just amplifies, like you really got to be on top of your stuff. And there's no low-hanging fruit anymore of, well, I'm going to get 12 targets a game, so saddle up, we're ready to go because we're going to go get 2,000 yards. They're not playing that brand of football anymore. And I think that's good for the long-term health, balance, and longevity of the offense. They got their issues to figure out offensively this upcoming offseason anyway. But whether or not Tyreek Hill's a part of the picture or not is a challenging conversation piece because they've made the transition to a more balanced offense this year. And there were times where there appears to be some apathy because we're not getting the volume of targets in the passing game. And then you're not practicing as often. And it feels like it's all kind of steadily built up to what we're seeing now, which is two really frustrating performances in big games for the Dolphins to try to position themselves to make a run for the postseason. And it cost you dearly against Houston, and you won in spite of Tyreek against San Francisco. Just being honest. So you look at all that, you look at his age, you look at the cost, you look at the metrics. He has the lowest success rate on targets of any of the top 4 targets on the team this year. He's got the lowest catch percentage of any of the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is going to go at least 6, 7, top 7 guys. As far as targets, the top 7 guys in targets in the passing offense, Tyreek Hill has the lowest catch percentage on those. And that's not an all blanket statement that accounts for accuracy on throws or, oh, I'm in trouble, let me try to find Tyreek Hill in this spot and make something happen or let him make a play. Like, I understand all of that. It's not a binary black and white assessment of that number. But I don't think anybody would watch Tyreek Hill play this year and say that he's playing to the standard that got him voted as the number 1 player in the NFL this past offseason and had him leading the league in receiving yards and being the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And I think that's part of the question and concern about what do you do moving forward with Tyreek Hill. So I looked at the numbers. We're going to get into that next. What options the Dolphins do and do not have if Tyreek Hill is or is not a piece of this puzzle for the team next year that's coming your way next. Make sure you stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy, whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports. Prize Picks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30 million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in the month of December. When your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get all your money in as fast as 15 minutes. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly right after you play $5. Don't even need to win to get the $50. Prize Picks. Run your game. The holiday season is expensive. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or were paying for twice? It certainly happened to me. Rocket Money has made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users, has been saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So Tyreek Hill entering into his age 31 season this year upcoming. I think there's an important note for you capologists out there. It is important for you to use the right resource and tool if you're going to look at these numbers for yourself. Right now, there is a large discrepancy between Spot Rack and Over the Cap, the two NFL contract and salary cap resources that exist on the internet, as far as the classification of Tyreek Hill's contract update and what it meant for the 2024 salary cap, which then has a trickle-down effect into future years and prorated money and this, that, the other thing. Right? I can tell you that the NFL Players Association's daily report on the salary cap figures for all 32 teams mirrors and reflects, because it's like $10+ million difference. Mirrors overthecap.com as far as looking at what the cap classification is. Tyreek Hill got a $17 million roster bonus this year, and Over the Cap, which mirrors the NFLPA's salary cap figure for the Dolphins, says that they did not prorate that money out. They kept it in 2024. All of it, all $17 million, as compared to if you would have divided it up, it would have been like $5.2 million this year, $5.4 million this year, $5.4 million next year, $5.4 million a year after that, $5.4 million after that, and $5.4 million after that. I'm not a math guy. It's $3.4 million. That's what happens when I try to do math off the top of my head. But you could split 17 across 5 seasons if you wanted to. And he has 3 years left on his deal, so you could have done $5 million in each of the next 3 years and prorated it out that way as well. According to Over the Cap, they did not. And that's important because that means that's potentially $13 million less that had been pushed out into future years that would create a greater challenge for you to try to offload the contract. So right now, the Dolphins are looking at, according to overthecap.com, a $27.6 million salary cap hit in 2025 for Tyreek Hill being on the roster. If you were to move on from Tyreek Hill, you could do so in a number of different ways. You could trade Tyreek Hill. I know this is a point of contention. You could trade Tyreek Hill pre or post June 1st against the salary cap. Now, there's dead cap ramifications that come of that. And this is part of the strategy of what options the Dolphins have. The Dolphins could very easily say, we're going to keep Tyreek Hill and we're going to restructure some of his cash for 2025. And then he's going to be scheduled on the books for $55 million in salary cap space for 2026, but $30 million of that, $35 million of that, when you include the roster bonus, is non-guaranteed. We'll just move on from him after 2025 and save $35 million, and then we'll carry the dead cap space as a result. Like, you can do that. You can keep Tyreek Hill on the roster in 2025, keep him back for another year, restructure him. You're gonna save about $35 million if you move on from him after 2025 of the 55 that he'd be on the books for if you restructured him next year. So that's viable, is to have him play one more year, restructure the dollars that exist there, or you could leave it and not touch it if you wanted to, and then save $35 million in cap space in 2026 by moving on from Tyreek. You could do that. The question is the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. And that is the challenge that every personnel decision boils down to. And, if you have Jalen Waddle and you saw an offense against San Francisco, which is one of the best defenses that you'll play all season long, and they've been playing really good football, the San Francisco 49ers. I think that's important to note. And it's not like they lost Dre Greenlaw and they'd had Dre Greenlaw and that was a critical loss that really killed them. Right? This is a defense that had not given up 380 yards of offense like they gave up to the Dolphins since week 2 to Minnesota. It was the last time the 49ers gave up that much yardage. It was, again, the fourth time they've given up more than 200 passing yards in a game. The 21 first downs that the Dolphins got on the 49ers is the second highest total of first downs that any team's got against the 49ers this year. They had the gang, right? This wasn't like you went in and faced a skeleton crew on defense. They had the gang that's been playing at a really high level since the bye. They just offensively have struggled. And I know there's an explosive play run that the guy should have gone down 48 yards instead of scoring from 50 out and all that. I get it. Okay. But I thought they played their best game of the season offensively across the board. Now, there have been better individual performances at a bunch of different spots. Tua, I think, has played better individually in games than what he played against San Francisco. Tyreek Hill has certainly played better in games than what he did against San Francisco. The offensive line, Teron Armstead played his best game of the season for my money. Kendall Lamb played well. Aaron Brewer's played better in games individually this season. You've obviously had Jalen Waddle. So that it's not uniform. Everybody played their best game, but the collective offensive effort, I thought, was the best game they've put together probably all season against San Francisco. And it came without two wide receivers in Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Now, Waddle didn't play. Tyreek Hill had a minimal impact in the game in a positive way relative to what he could have had. You very easily could have blown the doors off of this team if Tyreek Hill makes the plays that he didn't make. You're talking about a difference of potentially 8 points. And now you're talking about you scored 37 on San Francisco. And the only team that scored in that stratosphere against San Francisco this year was Green Bay, scored 38. So I think there's a conversation to be had about, okay, Jonnu Smith's under contract next year. Jalen Waddle just signed a long-term contract. Devon Achane is under contract this year. So you got the other three primary target getters. Expensive 30-plus-year-old wide receiver who's starting to show some downturn. What could you get? Can you get something for Tyreek Hill? And I think the answer is unequivocally yes. You can get something for Tyreek Hill, and you have options to trade him pre and post June 1st. If you traded Tyreek Hill next offseason before June 1st, you're effectively going to break even on the salary cap. The dead cap that would accelerate from the future years left in his contract is $600,000 more than what his currently scheduled salary cap is. So you'd lose an extra $600,000 in cap space and take a $28 million dead cap hit in 2025. But then you would clear up $52 million in cap space in 2026. Or alternatively, you could do the post-June 1st route, which I don't think helps you. I don't think waiting to move Tyreek Hill after the draft this year. If you're going to move on from Tyreek Hill, you want an asset that you can apply in this year's draft class. Or you want a player, right? And maybe that would be the justification is if you're going to get a player as a part of a swap, you wait and see what your needs are and see how you can round out your roster. But holding Tyreek Hill for an arbitrary extra $15 million in salary cap savings that you can't touch before June 2nd anyway, that doesn't really move the needle for me a whole lot, probably because I also am expecting you're going to have other post-June 1st moves that are going to open up significant dollars. So I would take the break even and then just say, hey, we're going to get 50-something million dollars in cap space for 2026 by moving on from Tyreek Hill now. You know who did that? The Buffalo Bills. They just did this. They just did this with Stefon Diggs this past offseason because Stefon Diggs, he hadn't even played it down on the new contract that they gave him when they gave him a contract adjustment when he got there. And they put extra years on the back end of their deal. At least the Dolphins didn't put any new years on the back end of the deal. They just said, sure, we'll give you a $5 million raise this year, and we'll guarantee next year's salary. Some team trained for, the Houston Texans trained for Stefon Diggs. They had to take 4 years worth of contract with significant salary, and they negotiated with Diggs to cut it all off so you could go back into free agency. From Tyreek's perspective, like a 1-year rental with Tyreek Hill is much more black and white than what the Texans did with Stefon Diggs. And Tyreek Hill, Stefon Diggs is a great player. Tyreek Hill is a better player than Stefon Diggs. And I think Tyreek Hill is probably commensurative to what Stefon Diggs was last year with Buffalo in his age 30 season. So he got traded in his age 31 season, just like we're potentially talking about the Texans or the Dolphins doing with Tyreek Hill. And the contract was uglier than the one with Tyreek, because at least with Tyreek, you know, he's got a $10 million base salary. He's got, from an option perspective, he's got what? It's about $16 million in a bonus that's scheduled to be spread out across 5 years. And it's $27.6 million in guaranteed cash. So you're trading for 1 year of Tyreek Hill for $27.65 million that you could prorate out as a new team. And you're talking about a $12.5 million dead cap hit the following year after, and Tyreek would be on the books for you for $13 million in 2025 on a rental. It's already baked in. You don't have to renegotiate the whole contract. This exact scenario just happened last year. Now, the Bills didn't cash out a great return for Stefon Diggs, and I think Miami would probably be happy to take something relatively equal. The Bills got a 2025 second-round pick for Stefon Diggs. So they got a second-round pick that you have to wait a year to get. Now, if you wanted to pick in the current year, and if you're going to move him before the draft so you could get an asset that you could apply to the team to help pour back into your roster this year with another young player, you're probably looking at a late day 2 draft selection for Tyreek Hill. So everybody's going to have their own opinion of that, but based off of recent precedent for a similarly successful player in a same age season with an uglier contract, you got a 2025 too. If the Dolphins wanted to move on from Tyreek Hill, there's nothing mathematically preventing them from doing it. And there's a plethora of other ways that they could restructure the cap space in this year to still have significant operating cap, much more than what they had last year when free agency opened. And then, no, we're taking the lumps on this contract now, and it's going to be clear, and then we're going to reap the benefits with $52 million of extra cap space in 2026. Now, the challenge, of course, is if you cut him, you're looking at, the salary is guaranteed. Now, if Tyreek has any incidences off the field that could compromise him, then you could probably negate the guarantees. But we're not at that stage right now. Now, Tyreek's had some silly, goofy, unacceptable, whatever adjective you would choose to describe, issues in years past in the offseason. And if it were me, I would probably be looking to move Tyreek before the draft. That would be my plan of attack if I were sitting in the executive chair. And you're free to disagree with me. I know people will. Some will agree with me, some will not. But if you're looking at the longevity and an opportunity with a player in Tyreek, that I think at this point, the longer you wait, it's a depreciating player. It's just the math of being a player who thrives with speed, and he wins in other ways. But he's going to be 31 next year. I think the Stefon Diggs situation is the framing that you need. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. You can check out the show, check out all your favorite shows. All your favorite teams have a program here on the Locked On Network. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll be back again tomorrow. No days off here on this program. We'll be back in tomorrow. There's a show coming your way. We hope to see you then. Go Fins.